Have you ever felt like you're just running on a treadmill that's getting faster and faster, but you're not actually going anywhere? You're exhausted, you're trying your best, but the finish line just keeps moving further away. Well, that feeling, it has a name. Today, we're going to dive into a quiet rebellion that's capturing this exact feeling, a movement known as lying flat.
Just let that sink in for a minute. This quote, it really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This isn't about laziness. It's about this deep, profound sense of disillusionment when the basic equation of life, effort in, reward out, just feels broken.
So what is really going on here? This isn't just some passing trend or a bad mood. It's a massive social movement with really deep roots in psychology, economics, and our modern world. So let's dig in and piece together this puzzle of why an entire generation is starting to feel like it's better to just lie down. And to really get this, we have to start with the name itself. This isn't just a catchy phrase someone made up. It's a full-blown movement that kicked off in China and, wow, it spread like wildfire because it resonated with people everywhere, including Taiwan. It's become a shared language for a shared experience. So what does lying flat, or tangping, actually mean? Well, it all started with this viral post online. A guy in China, after 2 years with no stable job, basically said, you know what, I'm out. He decided to opt out of the whole rat race. No more chasing a punishing career, no marriage, no mortgage. The goal? Just a minimal, low-stress life. It was a protest against the insane 99-6 work culture. That's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And it just struck a massive chord with young people who feel like those old markers of success are just totally out of reach.
But to really get why this idea is so powerful, we have to look at the psychology behind it. And that brings us to a really famous, I'll admit, pretty grim psychological experiment that just perfectly explains what happens to us when our effort feels totally pointless.
Okay, so back in the 1960s, a psychologist named Martin Seligman ran this experiment. First, you have the control dog. Nothing happens to it, pretty straightforward. Then you have the second dog. It gets shocked, but it figures out pretty quick that it can press a button to make the pain stop. It learns it has some control, some agency. But the third dog, its experience was totally different. It also got shocked, and it also had a button. But its button did absolutely nothing. No matter what it did, the pain just kept coming. So eventually, it gave up. It just laid down and took it. And here is the absolute kicker. The third dog had learned to be helpless. So later, when they moved it to a new cage where it could have easily escaped the shocks, it didn't even try. It just laid there and accepted the pain because its past experience had taught it that trying was completely futile. That's learned helplessness, and it's a powerful, powerful analogy for what happens when people feel trapped by economic forces way beyond their control. So let's pivot from that psychological feeling to the cold, hard data that's actually creating it. What's the real-world economic reality that's teaching this generation to feel helpless? Well, it all comes down to the numbers, and we're going to start with wages. Just take a look at this slide, because it tells such a powerful story. On the left, a job ad from a newspaper 20 years ago for an office assistant. On the right, a typical online ad today for the same job. The salary? It's barely budged. Now just think for a second about how much the cost of, well, everything else has gone up in those 2 decades. And this chart makes it even clearer. We're looking at real wages here. That's your salary after you factor in inflation, so what you can actually buy with your money. Before the year 2000, you see that steep climb. Things were looking up. But for the last 20 years, it's almost completely flat. Young people today are basically starting out with the same exact purchasing power their parents' generation had 2 decades ago. So why? What happened? Well, it was kind of a perfect storm. First, a ton of Taiwan's high-paying manufacturing jobs moved overseas. Second, the service sector grew to replace them, but a lot of those jobs just don't pay as well. And third, and this part is so ironic, a huge expansion in universities created a flood of graduates, which actually ended up devaluing degrees and pushing starting salaries down for everyone. Okay, but here's where it all gets super confusing. You turn on the news and you hear that the economy is doing great, right? That Taiwan's GDP is soaring. So if the country is getting richer, why don't people feel any richer? This chart right here, this is the smoking gun. It shows the exact moment when the story of the country's wealth split off from the story of its people's wealth. It's a phenomenon called the Great Decoupling. You can see it clear as day. Since the 1990s, the GDP line keeps on climbing up and up, but the line for real salary growth has just completely flatlined. The The country's wealth and its citizens' wealth started going in two very different directions. So if the country is making more money, but the people aren't seeing it in their paychecks, then where on earth is it all going? It's a great question, and it turns out there are two main reasons for this really strange disconnect.
First up is something called triangular trade. So a Taiwanese company might have its factory in, say, Vietnam. The stuff gets made there, but the profits are recorded back home in Taiwan. So on paper, it makes Taiwan's GDP look great, but the actual jobs and wages are being created somewhere else. The second reason is almost like a statistical illusion. Taiwan makes a ton of high-tech electronics, right? But the price of electronics is always falling. This creates a kind of virtual bloat in the GDP numbers that doesn't actually reflect a real increase in the country's spending power. So yeah, the numbers look good, but they're hiding a much less rosy reality for the average person. And there is no bigger, more powerful symbol of this whole struggle, no bigger source of anxiety for young people than the dream of owning a home. It's become the ultimate, and for many, a seemingly impossible goal.
So this is the housing price-to-income ratio. Basically, it measures how many years of an average salary it would take to buy an average home if you spent $0 on anything else. Look at this. In 2002, it was about 4.5 years. Tough, but maybe doable. By 2022, that number had more than doubled.
Almost 10 years. Just think about that. An entire decade of your working life, making an average salary without spending a single penny on food or gas or bills just to afford a home. When you see a number like that, the idea of lying flat starts to sound less like giving up and more like just doing the math.
And let's say you do it. You somehow manage to buy a place. Then you're faced with this. In a city like Taipei, a jaw-dropping 66%, that's 2/3 of your household income goes straight to the mortgage. That leaves just 1/3 for everything else. Food, bills, transport, maybe raising a kid, everything that actually makes up a life. The dream becomes a financial nightmare.
You know, researchers have even pinpointed a specific dividing line for this. They call it the 1978 divide. If you were born before then, you entered the job market when wages were still growing and houses were affordable. You got a foot on the ladder. But if you were born after 1978, you got hit with a double whammy, wages that were stuck in the mud and housing prices that shot to the moon. It's not a personal failure, it's a systemic problem. Some have even gone so far as to call it generational exploitation. So when you put all of this together, the psychological burnout from feeling helpless, the wages that won't grow, the housing market that's just out of control, the lying flat movement starts to look a lot different. It's not just about stopping, it's about fundamentally questioning the whole race itself.
This comment from a young person online just sums it all up so perfectly. When you realize that the ultimate prize at the end of your lifelong struggle, owning a home, is the exact same thing the previous generation had as their starting point, well, the motivation to keep running just kind of evaporates, doesn't it?
And really, this is the most crucial thing to take away from all this. Lying flat isn't necessarily about doing nothing forever. It's a pause. It's a form of quiet resistance. It's a moment to step back and ask a really fundamental question. In a game that feels rigged, are the old prizes even worth the incredible sacrifice anymore? And that is the real rebellion. Not just opting out of the race, but questioning if the prize is even worth winning anymore. For a lot of people, the answer is no. They're redefining what success looks like on their own terms, choosing to prioritize their mental health and their personal time over this relentless and seemingly unwinnable chase for wealth. And that leaves all of us with a pretty big question to think about. In a world that's so different from the one our parents grew up in, what does a meaningful finish line actually look like for you?